Hey everyone, and welcome to my talk on AI augmentation in games user research, how to maintain research quality using AI. I'm trying to present to you today a practical framework for integrating AI tools while preserving methodological rigor and research integrity in games user research. I'm quite excited about this talk because I worked on this decision framework for AI integration across the automation context that we have, across validating AI-generated instruments, and looking into how we can preserve essential human judgment, which is really important as more and more things become AI augmented. But first, who am I? I'm teaching UX design and UX research classes at the Stratford School of Interaction Design and Business at the University of Waterloo for about 10 years now. I'm also an editor of the Games User Research book, where you might have seen me before. I'm also an online creator and an entrepreneur that has built a business around online courses and Notion tools and other things that I make available for people online and in my newsletter, which I'm also really excited about. I'm also a UX researcher for the last 20 years, working on and off with different partners on improving the user experiences of not just games, but also any kinds of other applications. I'm now a university research chair and a tenured full professor as well. And I'm excited to be here today. So, what is the problem that we are all facing right now in user research? Well, it is that AI accelerates everything. Games user research is a substantial effort, as you all know. You have to recruit participants, you have to moderate sessions, and you have to transcribe interviews. You have to code the qualitative data and produce reports. So there are a lot of parts of the games user research process that really could be automated. And AI tools really offer that accelerated speed, that more throughput that you can get, and they make the research seem faster and cheaper for you. So there is a benefit of using AI tools. And before we go into the weeds and I talk about what is good and what's not, I wanted to give you a little bit of a view into my AI tool stack. And this is all in addition to the tools that we all have come to know and embrace, or some of us more than others. But I've certainly dove right into the big LLMs that are out there, specifically ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Grok as well. I've even played around with some of the other tools like Perplexity. So one of the things that I do use quite often that I want to recommend to everyone that is currently worried about, okay, I can't really get all of that access in the free tools. Well, we're at a current moment in time where it's kind of an interesting pivot because we can actually log into AI Studio, as you can see here, and it is completely free. Let me just quickly show you. I can move over and show you how that looks like. So we're going to try and go into Google's AI Studio right here. And in AI Studio, it's actually kind of cool because on the right-hand side here, you can select some of the newest models from Google that are out there, such as Gemini 3 Pro, or even the Nano Banana models that you might have heard about that make it really easy to generate images and other things. Now you can attach this to your API, but this is really a preview playground. So in this playground, anyone can run a prompt, and you can even add specific system instructions and have multiple system instructions here that are run across your playground. This is much more control than you would have in a regular chat interface. And then you can add your API key, and you can even influence the temperature. Now, since Gemini 3, this is less of an issue because it does do better reasoning throughout. But in older models, it was actually quite interesting to play around with the temperature because you could get better results that way. And here you can select the thinking level now for the newer models anyways. And then you can structure your outputs, you can call functions, you can seed it with URL context if you want. So a lot more options than you have in your regular kind of tools. And then you can just fire off a prompt here, such as, who is the most interesting games user researcher? Let's see what it says. And see, the model is grounded with a Google search. So in this case, it'll just run a little Google search. It will do some thinking. You can see exactly how many tokens it's using up here as it executes the search. And you can, of course, expand the views. And quite interesting. It pulls up some interesting names, analyzes them. A lot of these are people that you know quite well from past summits. I think Celia Hodent and Steve Bromley and John Hobson are all in the race here to make it. And so Celia, and then we got Randy from Microsoft, one of my big idols, one of the people that brought me into this. We got John Hobson, of course. We got Steve Bromley. And we got myself. Exciting. So quite an honor to be named with these 5 other people in here. But really quite exciting what you can do with this Google AI Studio. So this is kind of a neat functionality that you have and just kind of makes things a little bit easier. Now, Google Notebook LM is also another tool I really like using. And if I pop over here again and I'll just show you this, you can just import a bunch of sources. You can do deep research to add more resources. And you might already know this, but I've just kind of preloaded it with all of the GUR Summit talks. And then you can chat basically with all the talks that are in there. And you could say, what would a good, funny quote be to start a GUR Summit talk? Let's see what it says based on the talks that we already have in here. And, some of the stuff is better, some of the stuff is less good, but it is kind of a nice way to chat in a much more localized content window than you would do if you're working with a big user research, I almost said, a big large language model, right? So let's see if it came out with something funny. My name is James Berg. Hello, James. I do have a name beyond the screaming guy, but if that's all you know, as that's all right. These are all jokes that have actually been brought up. Randy and I are super excited to be here. We're both very snarky fellows. Okay, exciting. What else do we have? How many people here have played Dragon Age Inquisition? I think those were from the Dragon Age Inquisition talks. Presenters often quote these phrases: "We don't have time to do research. The feature is not polished. Yet let me finish it and then we can test it." Yeah, those are actually really good quotes and things that I would probably say as well. So Google Notebook LM, just an easy way to dig into existing data. And I'm sure all of you are using it already. I just kind of wanted to give a quick insight into that. Now, one of the things that I think AI has done really, really well and that I use it every day with is that it has kind of replaced ref.com for me, which is a service I used to use to do transcriptions. But now I use these tools, the Transcriptionist, which is all local transcription. So if you're on a Mac, I don't even know if this runs under Windows, but I'm a Mac person. So this is a tool that I use quite often. You can drag and drop an interview file or an MP3 file from an audio recording that you've done, and you get to run it locally. You can pre-download the AI brain for it, and it will all run locally on your machine. I find that super useful. It's a tool I use for more sensitive data, things that I don't want to share over the internet, and just generates really accurate transcripts that I can then use and do some coding on and some thematic analysis if I want. Another tool that I like a lot is Granola AI. This is a meeting assistant originally, but it really kind of plugs into your Mac and listens to everything that you're saying and talking. So if you're conducting interviews and other things on your computer, it's a really nice way, specifically, let's say you're doing an interview through a Zoom call. It's a really nice way to do a follow-up because it will generate the transcript, but it will also, based on templates that you can feed it, generate, for example, a user research report if you put in the right template for how you want that to look like. And so really at the click of a button just at the end of the call that you can do that, and you can quickly pull out the insights that you want from that discussion. It's just a really quick way, again, to work with a transcript much quicker than the Transcriptionist. Still, these are two really useful tools that I like to use with this type of qualitative research where you're trying to get a lot of data quickly. Another tool that I find super helpful, and this is kind of interesting for anyone doing market research, is Perplexity's comment browser. Now, as you might have seen, if you're going over here, I have it actually open. This is comment right here, and we can always click on the assistant button on the right, which will enable us to quickly query the page that we have open. Now, this is specifically interesting if you're pulling out app reviews. Now, as you know, if you're trying to improve a product before you even run the user research, one of the things that we like to do is to do some market research here. And one of the easiest ways to do that, now you can use tools like Craftful, which I think has been acquired now, and other AI tools that are out there that are specifically for that. But I'm talking about the low-cost solution. Like you can run 5, I think, Perplexity queries for free every day. So if you want to get, your budget started here to get started on user research, this is a great way to do it. Now, what I do is I usually have a huge database of AI prompts that I've developed over time. And then you can usually insert bits and pieces in the prompt. And I didn't even do that here because I didn't even need it, because the app name wasn't relevant, because we already have the context in here. And then in that prompt, this is, the kind of mega prompts that you want to use when you want very detailed answers from the AI. I then tell it to break down the structure of the RSS feed that I see here. Why am I using an RSS feed? Because it's really hard, unless you're using third-party tools, to get like a bigger overview of the reviews. Usually, if you just go to the App Store, you get like 2 or 3 reviews. But the trick here is if you hit that RSS customer ID button, that's a really quick way to get access to all of the reviews. And then I basically turn that RSS data into a JSON file. Now, JSON is really nice when you're working with AI because it really allows you to give structure to your data. So you're kind of turning it into a different data object to work with. And then once I'm done that, I don't even need some fancy UX tool that I might be paying a huge amount of money for. Looking at you, Dovetail, you're overcharging me. Anyway, so we're looking at all this user feedback. And in this case, it's for Candy Crush Saga on the iOS. So it could already pull that out from the RSS feed. And then it gives you an executive summary. And so here you get recent user sentiments, and it tells you what the issue is, right? We get aggressive monetization, big surprise, that disrupt core gameplay. And the users accept the freemium model, but they reject the current implementation. They're not excited about this. They talk about rigged and broken, and an insane volume of pre-level interruptions. As a good user researcher, this is already something where you can dive right in there, right? And if you're coming just out of school and you want to find a low friction way to get started with user research, a really cool intro way to get into this. So we got all these, points that we're dealing with here, and we got these stability issues, and it already gives us a severity rating, which is quite interesting. So really it creates a user research report based on the RSS data that I fed it, which is the customer reviews. Now, if you have some sort of internal tools where you're collecting some data and you're giving some of that out for people, and it is something that is not super private, because keep in mind, if you're using Comet and you're behind the restrictions of a company, you might not have that same access. But if it's publicly available data, or if it's like user data that you've collected from the public, from Steam or something like that, and you have it all together in an overview page, this is a really low friction way to get through that data quickly, because here you can just simply put it in Perplexity and then query it and do your user research reports all on it. And just a really quick way to get started. So this is kind of an easy, low friction way for me to do these things. Now, I'm looking here because I'm like, where's ChatGPT now? Here we go. So, and let's pull that over here. So this is a UX Research and Design AI custom GPT. It's getting a little bit dated now, but it's still pretty nice. So I'm going to pull up my ChatGPT here. And so I opened this and I started with one of the pre-given prompts: help me analyze my research data, ask me clarifying questions. And then it just popped out and said, what are you doing? Are you doing a usability test, a spreadsheet? Do you have usability issues, stakeholders, design team, whatever have you? And then you can provide all of that information, as I did here. And then it said, oh, great. So now please upload the spreadsheet data, and then I will conduct that analysis for you. It's a really nice tool, just a nice way to learn a little bit more about UX, as well as to do some low friction user research that might be interesting for you. So these are kind of the tools that I'd like to play around with on a daily basis as I'm, exploring AI use cases. But of course, this is not really what this talk is about. Otherwise, we'd be listening to Lennart just talk about his favorite use cases for a long time. But this is really more about creating an AI strategy for games user research. So one of the things that we have encountered is we've had this big promise of AI. We were promised speed. We were promised scale. AI is supposed to be the ultimate research assistant. And, in a way it is. But in games user research, speed without rigor is really something that leads to flawed insights and costly design decisions. We don't want to do that. We are at our heart researchers, so we want to find ways how we can use AI strategically while we maintain research quality. So, and this is where it gets interesting. one of the things that we've seen in studies, we've run a study ourselves, there's lots of other studies out there now, that people think in these studies, people are basically exposed to output that is AI generated, and that is either labeled as AI generated or not labeled as AI generated. And so people think they don't like AI because as soon as something gets labeled as AI, then they have a negative sentiment towards that thing that they're looking at, right? But the interesting thing is they just judge it differently because of the label. If we're comparing whether or not they can tell the difference, they usually can't tell the difference. And we did that in a study on peer reviewers, but it's been done in lots of different other studies since then, where we're looking at that bias that people have towards AI. And if you're in the audience right now and you're kind of feeling the same way, that you're kind of feeling sort of an antipathy against AI, just keep an open mind as we're going through these. I know there's a lot of arguments against it, and that's okay. But it is really something that is changing how we interact. It's changing how we conduct research. So it's something that's worth looking into, despite the risks and other things that are attached to it. So I do want you to understand that that bias is inherent in a lot of people, but it is really not something where we have actual evidence for things being worse. And I'll go into detail what that means for qualitative analysis, because this is where it gets interesting. This is where LLMs should shine. But just in general, there is not really a difference that can be told in terms of how this AI can be understood. Now, I want to quote Johnny Dankoff here, big heart, because he said once, and this was in 2018, long time ago in London, Fund Summit back then, that creating a good strategy is less of a pack of lies and more something like a collection of very hopeful half-truths made in best intentions with good reasoning and solid logic behind it. Wow, Johnny, that's amazing. That's what I'm trying to attempt here as well. I'm trying to give everyone a good strategy that is not such a pack of lies, but really something where we're trying to make the best out of it with that good reasoning and that solid logic. So thanks for that inspiration, Johnny. So really, one of the things why AI quality standards matter in games user research is that even peer reviewers, and this is based on our own research, cannot reliably detect AI-generated text, right? So there's an invisible quality risk in the research output that we want to be aware of. Games user research lacks domain-specific validation frameworks, right? We don't have a framework. I'm proposing one in today's talk, hopefully, to give you a couple of tables and things, and I know that gets really crowded later, but we'll go through it. And it is important to have these validation frameworks so that we can, overcome these unique challenges that we have in player experience interpretation. And without systematic quality controls, the AI augmentation really threatens the subtle understanding that defines excellent player research. And this is actually the thing where it gets interesting. So I had to ask the question, can large language models perform qualitative coding as accurately as human researchers? And yes, the new Google Scholar Labs, I guess it's called, gives you the opportunity to ask semantic questions like that instead of doing a keyword analysis and then manually doing your systematic literature review. I'm using a tool called Consensus here, which allows you to do rapid literature reviews, rapid fire, really fast. So I spent some of my deep research credits on this. And I wanted to see, what do the studies say? And it is really quite interesting. And yes, in this case, for consensus, you want to ask a yes or no question so that you can see, is there a consensus in the literature? And so one of the things that we can tell is that, yes, there are some studies, very few, 13%, that say AI can match human coding for broad themes, specifically with larger data sets, and specifically pointing out these time savings that we're getting. There is some that are on the fence, about 70% of the studies that it found, where they say, and this is in healthcare and social sciences, that there's moderate to high agreement. They're using Cohen's kappa and other things where they're trying to match that. And this is actually interesting. So when we're looking at a measure like Cohen's kappa, and we're not 100% sure, okay, like what is good and what is not. And in these cases, I think they had a score of 0.57. So that is something where if I was the primary investigator on that study, I would pause that project and I would force the assistants to reach a score through, rereading the codebook, retraining them until they at least hit 0.7 or 0.8 for that kappa score. So if you have a lower score, lower than 0.6, then that implies that the coders, or in this case the AI, interpret the definitions differently almost half of the time, right? And that is something that is really not much better than luck. And so this is one of the things that you also see in the hallucination quotas, is that it's like a 40% quota. Like, so 40% of the time it'll make up stuff to fill in the blanks, right? And that's really not the kind of accuracy we want to do in research. And so it is really important to look at the studies and be a little bit skeptical, because again, we can see here there's a lot of mixed feelings, and there's a lot of some papers also saying no here, a majority actually saying no, that they cannot be as accurate. So they're saying it lacks the interpretive depth and the reliability for complex or subtle qualitative coding tasks. A lot of people are saying it's really good at pulling up data and looking up data, and specifically as the models are getting better. Now, these studies are usually done on, I think the maximum models that you can see is GPT-4, but like we're in, the Gemini 3 era, and this is really like the huge change. It was Gemini 3 recently, just because of the large context window. It's just amazing the things that you can do now that you couldn't do before, and the accuracy that you're getting. So I'm like, this is the current state, but let's look at this in a year. I'm sure this will change as, with more elaborate prompting, and this is something a lot of the studies also mention, and with more advanced models, we will be able to pick up more of these nuances, but we still have to understand the data. And this is an interesting study that I picked out from Morgan that was looking at how well ChatGPT did at reproducing the results from an analysis using reflexive thematic analysis. And so what they found is basically that AI emphasized the consequences, but that they needed, a broader interpretation of the specifics that were located. So they weren't really good at that interpreting things. They were really good at the topic summaries, summarizing things and being descriptive, but they were not so good at interpretive. And this is kind of throughout a lot of the literature that I've found, is that the interpretation is still lacking a little bit. But the interesting thing is, and this is what the paper says here, it's worth considering whether these discrepancies wouldn't have been any different with the coder. So this is interesting when you're looking at these studies, similar to what I said earlier. If I'm at that low agreement level, I would definitely go and retrain my researchers as well. So why wouldn't you go and retrain the AI at that stage as well? So this is important to keep in mind, because maybe we need to retrain the AI and then we're going to get there. Okay, so this brings us essentially, now that we have these mixed feelings and kind of know what the studies are saying specifically about qualitative research, which is a huge chunk of what we're doing in games user research. How much human oversight do we need, and where do we need it? So let me give you this framework that I've developed about the human oversight in 3 different tiers. So there's the mandatory human review, tier 1, where we're looking at when a human researcher must review or check the work, even if they're using an AI tool for help. So when we're dealing with serious or sensitive topics, if the research involves, checking for things like discrimination or barriers that make the game hard for people with disabilities, then absolutely a human must handle the coding and the analysis. And this is also true when you're dealing with data from kids, right? Like any analysis that uses data from minors needs mandatory human oversight. There is no leeway for risk here. And when the feedback is confusing or points to a huge problem that you have, so let's say a player gives confusing negative feedback that might mean there's a big game-breaking bug, a human needs to interpret what the player really meant, right? Like, is this just game speak? Are they just talking to each other? Because AI really has trouble with that game speak, that smack talking that's happening. It is really not good at interpreting that, and thinks the player is about to leave when the player was just kind of giving some sort of pep smack talk to their co-player. And this is interesting to keep in mind, that if this is something where it would lead to a huge change, that you would then go to your team and say, hey, we need to fix this. Do not just take the AI output at face value, but interpret it with a human angle on it. And this is also true when you're trying to break into different cultures. And if you're looking at if the research compares people from different countries or backgrounds. And we know that the AI is biased because it's not trained on all different cultures, then it is really important for a human to step in, check the results, and understand what's going on. And when we're using new ideas that the AI hasn't been tested on, so if the research uses new ways to measure things or new concepts that the specific AI system hasn't been validated, so in this case, a human must also lead that review, and that is really key. Now, the next thing here is stratified sampling. And so that essentially means that sometimes you need to check some parts of the AI's work to make sure it's doing a good job, but you don't have to check everything in the output. So this is situations where you're checking just a sample of the results. You don't need to check the entirety of the results. So when AI makes up the categories, and this is something that a lot of people have noticed if the AI is looking at player comments, the raw data, and creates new themes or codes to describe them, if you're doing something like this inductive thematic analysis, then a human absolutely needs to check a sample to make sure the codes make sense. A lot of the times, there is an overlap in existing studies, but there is also a difference if you rerun it, right? Because it will not be always super consistent. Again, something that can be fixed a little bit to some degree with prompt engineering, but it is not something that you can completely avoid. So you do have to do these spot checks and kind of work with the AI-assisted coding. This is where, our friends with the wonderful AI tools that they have and that they're offering for a lot of money are coming in and are helping us to do this assisted thematic analysis. And it's interesting to try them out in all of these AI UX tools that you might be using in your company, but to understand that you do have to do full-on sample checking for some of the samples. And also, when you're studying player feelings and the involvement of players, if the research is about things why players enjoy a game, so their motivation or their engagement, then the ideas depend a lot on when and how they're measured, right? So you need to understand that context, and that's when a human needs to come in and sample those results as well. And when you're analyzing game feedback that is coming from competitive games, if the research is about this, then the AI might be biased because it doesn't fully understand the language of the experienced gamer, gaming literacy, right? Again, humans need to check the sample. This is something I mentioned earlier as well. And when tracking changes over time, if the research is about a game that gets updated a lot, right, and the researchers need to make sure that the data and the findings are consistent across all of the updates, that's the longitudinal research, then a human also needs to check that sample for consistency. Also, you might have different models at that point, so you definitely want to come in and check that. And then tier 3, which is the lowest tier, you only have to do spot checks. That means you only need to check a random few things that the AI did because the tasks are so simple or they follow such clear rules that it is okay to, let's say, do 80% of AI automation here. So these are situations where, the AI is using the rules that you already gave it, such as an established codebook, and categorizes things according to those rules. So there's a very stringent output space within which the AI operates. And here it's really about figuring out if, a comment is happy or sad and doing some sort of sentiment. So when AI are summarizing numbers, there is a bit of a risk. So just keep that in mind. But when the AI is translating standard surveys into a different language, don't need to check a lot in that. Or when the violations are small, when they're just flagging comments or actions that are only small rule-breaking issues, low severity kind of stuff, then it's also okay to just spot check the outputs. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want to understand how to make sure that the people stay skilled at research even when they use AI for help. And this is really a problem that we're facing, not just in higher education, but in any kind of training scenario where we're trying to help train people in these AI tools. So we want to really help them to stay smart and skilled. So if you're a chef and you still want to make sure that you know how to cook by hand, even if you have a robot assistant, something like that. So one of the ideas is that you code the data manually first, specifically for trainees as you're training somebody on the job, before anyone uses the AI for analysis. This is also for yourself to kind of stay fresh, to every once in a while to do that manual coding, at least for 100 pieces of data, because that helps you train your brain to spot these mistakes and know when the AI doesn't quite sound like it's giving you the right answer. So you want to also do team check-ins, calibrations, every couple of months. The team should all code the same data, just, 30 spots of data basically, and then compare their answer so that they know, okay, do we agree? Are we still having that sentiment together as a team? Can we all make the same decisions even when we're using AI co-coders? And this is interesting. If you are an AI auditor, you can take turns being the person whose job it is to only check the AI's work. So you're not using the AI to do your own analysis. You're just double checking the analysis done by the AI. It helps you catch some of the errors that the AI might be making. And, someone who uses the tool all the time might stop noticing those errors. So you keep an AI failure log, and this is quite important in terms of documentation, so that you know every time the AI makes a mistake. It's essentially something like whether it makes up a quote or has some misunderstanding about culture. And that's basically a teaching tool that you could then use to work against it with better prompts, and you kind of try to avoid some of these mistakes, or that you could then also use to fine-tune a model, which you can also do on Hugging Face or other websites. So all of these are options that you have. And then when you reject AI augmentation, this is really times where it's too risky, that the AI can't do a good job. So if you do any research with trauma, harassment, or mental health in the game space, not a lot of companies are doing that, but your research might be related to that. AI is really not good at handling these serious feelings or anything related to harm with the proper care. So in those cases, I would not use AI at all. Having innovative game genres is another thing, because if you're trying to evaluate game genres that the AI domain knowledge is not really there yet, then if the game is so new and the AI doesn't understand the players or the way to play it, then AI might be of limited help for the game that you're developing. If you're working on a game that has a low resource language, then you're also getting unreliable outputs due to insufficient training data. If you have something like Welsh, or indigenous languages, that is not something that the AI is trained on or can be working with really well. Very unlikely that you're in a spot like that unless you're doing university-related research, but this is something to keep in mind. And also, if you're working with a regulatory body, if you're, in the UK, there's a bunch of advocacy groups. Specifically, when you're trying to work with those regulatory bodies, then you really have to make sure that you have that human explainability bit where you're explaining every bit of the way, and that you have audit trails that make it really easy for somebody to audit your work and to understand, how these things come together. Specifically, anything that's related to age ratings, you need to have a human in there that explains how these things come together. This is not something I would ever farm out to AI. And participatory research. Now, I know this is happening a lot in HCI, but it's not happening a lot in the games industry, but some people embrace it. If you're doing some sort of co-creation as part of your game development process, then you definitely create the knowledge and you create that lived experience, that human understanding. And this is not something that a machine can easily do. All right. So what does that leave us with? Well, it leaves us with a final framework, and this is sort of putting it all together in like a nice actionable table for you: when to use AI, how to validate it, and where human judgment is essential. All right, so let's have a look. Ooh, I know, just look at this giant thing. But I wanted to give it to you so that you can really easily go through the different task types that you might encounter in games user research and look at the data sensitivity for all of these task types. And of course, I got AI to help me with putting this together based on some of the papers that I've read. A really nice workflow between NotebookLM, getting all of the studies together, and then using Perplexity as well as Gemini to kind of pool everything together into recommendations. Thank you very much for supporting me, AI. Okay, so what we have here in the end product is a decision matrix. And this decision matrix is really there to help us to do games user research and to decide when it's okay to use AI and how carefully you as a human need to check the AI's work. So if we're looking at all of these different columns, we have task type. Task type is essentially the job that the AI is being asked to do. If you clean survey data, transcribe interviews, figure out player feelings, this is the important task of games user research that you're doing. Then we have data sensitivity. So here we're describing how private or serious the information is that the AI is dealing with. If it's low, then we just have general numbers or common data. If it's high, we have personal feelings attached to names, maybe complex experiences, maybe sensitive feedback. And if it's highest, then we have data from minor minors, or serious problems like harassments that I mentioned earlier, really can't do it there. We have the complexity of the task, which is also really important to measure how hard the job would be for the AI. If it's a simple repetitive task, sort of grind work, AI is perfect for that. If it's jobs that need deeper interpretation or understanding, there's definitely only assistance and a final say of the human involved. And then we have the typical AI use, and that's kind of how AI is usually involved in these tasks. If it's a routine task, AI can handle it. You want to maybe even build an agent so that you can automate it. If it's an assistant, this is the more common scenario that most people are aware of. You have an AI that just helps the human researcher, that you can ping pong back and forth and get better insights. And if it's not advised unsupported, that means do not put that in there. Specifically, thematic analysis is still the holy grail that people are trying to crack, but it's not perfect for a lot of that stuff. Specifically, if you're reading Brown and Clark's manifesto recently, I can find that link for you if you want, that said specifically that they reject, and these are the people that came up with thematic analysis, they reject the use of AI for thematic analysis. Specifically, reflexive thematic analysis is something that they do not recommend AI for. So we're going to have to go with the recommendations of the author of the original method. Then minimum validation needed, which is the quality check needed to trust the AI's work. For example, if you need to check the results against existing human standards, if you have tasks like qualitative coding, you want to have at least 2 human experts that agree. If you have a third AI in there, sure, but you don't want to have only AI-generated coding or only AI-generated themes. That is currently not working perfectly. And human oversight, for example, is how much a human has to monitor the AI's results. As the tasks are more complex or more sensitive, you want more oversight from the AI. So it moves from minimal to always to required here. It's an easy way to figure this out. The main idea behind this table is essentially that as the research tasks deal with more sensitive data, more complex data, then you should either use the AI less or have a human check all of the work so that you make sure the research quality is high. This is the way that we're going to have to approach this. This is the way that we should be approaching AI augmented work as games user researchers. And this is just a nice way of putting it all together. Now, I got Gemini to actually nano banana because there's a new button in Google Slides where you can click beautify a slide. So it beautified the slide for me. Awesome, nano banana. So what you want to do in transparency here is disclose AI tool use in your documentation, just like I just did, and basically log every instance of AI assistance, including the specific tools and prompts that you've used. You want to maintain separate archived version logs for original and AI processed materials. This is important as you're building your audit trails. And you also want to justify the use of AI tools by having some sort of reasoning for why it was useful for your application. That is really important to get that understanding of everyone together of why you're using AI in this specific use case. So detailed logs, 3 separate sets of files, or more than 3, but ideally minimum 3. So you have original data, material AI produced in the final finished version, so that you have sort of a version log there, and a record of the changes, some sort of log that you have available. Now, of course, you can automate this process. You can build a Notion dashboard or whatever, but it is really important that you are aware of all of these different things. Disclosing, logging the instances of the use, separate versions, and then justifying it. These are the 4 things that I think you should be doing in terms of transparency of AI use. And again, remember what I said earlier. This is not easy right now because there's a lot of human bias. As soon as you do that, people think you're maybe not doing enough work or you're not doing rigorous work, but you are, and it's okay. Just understand that's the case and that you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so here are the criteria for evaluating AI assistance on research rigor. Again, another table, I know, but it's basically so that you can check if the AI is helping with research in a good and honest way for you, so that you can go through this basically as a checklist so that the AI is not messing up the research quality. Authenticity of insight means the AI's conclusions need to be deep and original, just like a human's. They shouldn't be simple copied templates. Is that not possible? Then, it's not rigorous enough. We're kind of at the brink of some of that, but not really for a lot of the stuff. How subjective, how nuanced is the expression of the AI? It has to keep the complicated feelings, the tone, the subtle hints that are found in the human data, and it is not allowed to simplify things too much. Again, these are things that you can fix with a good prompt, but it is definitely important to double check how well the prompt is doing. So really it's like an iteration of the prompt and the context you give to the AI. No shallow responses, basically meaning you don't want to accept AI answers that are too simple or too formal, that ignore things that are confusing or unclear. Good research is always dealing with complexity, so we want to keep that there. And then documenting the validation process means you must always test the AI's work by comparing it to data that humans have already coded. You always need to have some sort of framework that you're evaluating it against, so that this comparison can say, okay, it's validated, because otherwise you're just doing guesswork and you're prone to hallucinations. You don't want that. You want to be transparent in your documentations. You have to tell everyone exactly which AI tool was used, how it was used, where it helped, and every step of the research must be documented. If you have some sort of bias, you must check if the AI is being unfair because of things like there's a group of people, there's a culture, there's a type of game. So if there's something that's inherent to your game or game community, you need to find ways to either prompt around that or be able to flag some of these illogical patterns that you find in the output. And the final conclusions need to keep the special human understanding that AI can't copy, right? So especially for new and unexpected problems, you want to be complementary, not just AI only or human only in that case, but you want to have that complementary understanding. You want to have a reproducibility. Every step and decision the AI makes must be written down so that a different person could repeat the process. This is just good science, but because AI is a black box, even using a slightly different model and not having access to the old model will mess that up. So the more you can run locally, the better. Unfortunately, some of the local models are just not anywhere near as good as some of the available models online, but a lot of companies are now fine-tuning some of the models, and then we're getting to better results, and then you're using something just internally. And of course, how are you handling the hallucinations? You must have a clear plan when the AI finds something that is, nonsense or uncertain. Then you should be able to flag these, or they make the AI flag these so that they can be checked immediately. One good thing to do that is actually asking the AI for a confidence score of each of the outputs that it generates. Works really well for me. I've done it with ChatGPT and Claude and others. And you just always ask it to give you a percentage of how confident it is in the answer, and that will make things much better for you. So, wrapping up, how do we keep the human touch? We want to manually review the core data samples to build the human intuition that we have. And we really want to compare the human coding with the AI's results to log the differences. Final insights and recommendations must always come from the humans. You always must take responsibility for the AI-generated output. And you must flag all ambiguous, I'm very ambitious right now. Flag all ambiguous or new player comments for a required human review. And then clearly state what parts of the research relied on the human versus the AI work. Essentially, you want to make the contextual synthesis, the empathy, the reflective reasoning a non-negotiable part of your game's user research quality assurance practice. That's how you keep the human touch. This was it. I know the presentation was packed with a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too fast for you. You can always slow it down later. Contact me on LinkedIn if you want. I'm always happy to talk to anyone interested in games user research. I'm also on Twitter, on a lot of different other platforms, also on YouTube. Feel free to comment, like, subscribe, whatever you have. It was a pleasure hanging out with you today, and I hope you're enjoying the Games User Research Summit this year. Thank you very much.